So today I'm going to talk about one of the most misunderstood disciplines in the Catholic Church by our Protestant brothers and sisters. One of the things they really don't understand is why our priests are celibate. So I'm going to show you in the Bible where this is a biblical discipline, and I'm also going to knock out a few myths and clear some things up that even I didn't know till I was a Catholic for a little while. So myth number one, you have to be unmarried to be a Catholic priest. Okay? Within the Catholic Church, we have what they call the Latin Rite and the Eastern Rite. The Latin Rite traditions come from the Western hemisphere of the Church, and the Eastern Rite from the East. So in the Eastern Rite, priests are allowed to be married. Okay? They're only allowed to be married to one wife, and if she dies, they can't be remarried. And they have to be married before they become a priest. So if they're a single man who becomes a priest, then he has to live a life of celibacy, just like the Latin Rite that most of us Catholics belong to, myself included. But even within the Latin Rite, there are exceptions. Episcopalian priests that convert to Catholicism that are already married are allowed, obviously, because Catholicism against divorce, they're allowed to stay married. They actually have to stay married until their wife dies. But once their wife dies, they're under the same rules as the Eastern Rite Church, and they're not allowed to remarry. And also some Lutheran priests come over, and I believe they have the same stipulations. Okay? So that's myth number one. You could be a married Catholic priest. Okay? Myth number two is that's a doctrine and a dogma that can't be changed. It's not. It's changed over the years. In fact, the Latin Rite didn't have their priests take this vow until I don't know, maybe 1200, 1300. It's, maybe during medieval times sometime. It's not something the Catholic Church on the Latin Rite has always asked their priests to do, take a voluntary vow of celibacy. So now I'm going to go into the scriptures that support it, and then I'm going to go into the scriptures that my evangelical brothers might bring up to object to it. So we're going to go with, we'll start with why, the pros. And if you want, you can turn your Bible to Matthew chapter 19, verses 10 through 12. And this is Jesus speaking. Well, the disciples and then Jesus. The disciples said to him, okay, so let me just give you the context, because like I always say in my videos, context is everything. When reading the Bible, you have to read the Bible as a whole, and you have to read each verse in context with that chapter, in context with the whole Bible. So, Jesus is talking about divorce, okay, up to this point. And then the disciple said to him, if such is the case of a man with his wife, it is not expedient to marry. So basically, after Jesus tells him everything about marriage, he's like, yo, don't sound like a good idea to get married. And it's kind of funny because my daughter's engaged, and my wife sat her down and gave her the good, the bad, the truth, the real truth, not just the romantic novel side of being married. And my daughter was like, wow, why would anybody want to get married? And my wife said, because it's better than the alternative. So for what it's worth, my advice to people who want to get married, it's a line I stole from Dr. Dobson, but like Herman Cain says, you say it once, you give credit to who said it. You said it twice, you say you heard it from somebody, you say it the third time and you own it. But I'm not going to do that. I'll give credit to Dobson on this one. Dobson said, don't marry the person you think you could live with. Marry the person you know you can't live without. I think that's good advice. But that's going off subject. I apologize. So Matthew 19:10, the disciple said to him, if such is the case of a man with his wife, it's not expedient to marry. And then Jesus replied, "Not all men can receive this precept, but only those whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. He who is able to receive this, let him receive it." That's Matthew 19:10 through 12. It's pretty deep. So a eunuch, if you're not aware, since we never use that word anymore, someone who's been castrated. Some people were born that way, deformities, I guess. Some people were made that way by like kings, and other people like a rich person who has a bunch of wives and he has male guards guarding him. He'd make him a eunuch, so he knew he could trust them. When I was in the Navy, I had a cruel joke about eunuchs. I used to say about the new recruits coming in, I'm like, they're about as useful as a eunuch at the Playboy Mansion. I apologize, it's not very nice thing to say, but I'm just kind of giving you an idea what a eunuch is from a blue collar perspective. So long story short, getting back to the Bible, Jesus is saying some people are born basically virgins, some people are forced to be virgins, and then some people choose it for the kingdom of God. Some people choose it. That's deep. You're talking about being totally sold out to Jesus for a man to make himself a eunuch. Again, I'm going to read 19, verse 12. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. For the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Wow. That's a sold out man of God. That's a man of God who's totally living for the Lord. Okay? And it's a gift. And Jesus said it's a gift, Most of us don't have that gift, Most of us do not have that gift. And Jesus said, I just lost it. I'm sorry. I just lost the page. But Jesus said some men are given this. So basically, when he says some men are given this, he's saying it's a gift. So virginity and celibacy is a gift, not to be laughed at or mocked. It should be honored and respected and looked up to. That's what celibacy should be, the way it should be treated. Now we'll go to the Apostle Paul. I'm going to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, the whole chapter. You read this whole chapter when you get a chance and you really get a full understanding. But I'm going to just give you a couple verses because I don't want this video to go on for an hour. We'll start with 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 8. To the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is well for them to remain single as I do. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to be aflame with passion. So St. Paul was not married. And he was telling the Christians it's better to stay not married. And then I'll read why. He explains why later in the chapter. He says, but if you're going to burn with lust, it's better to get married. Because he knows we're men, and, we're all tempted. So he'd rather us not sin and have sex outside of marriage. So that was that warning. Then if you go down to verses 32 to 34, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 32. I want you to be free from anxieties. Oh, that'd be nice. The unmarried man is anxious about the affairs of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly affairs, how to please his wife. Isn't that the truth? And his interests are divided. And the unmarried woman or virgin is anxious about the affairs of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly affairs, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your individual devotions to the Lord. So he's like, listen, I don't want to put something on you. I don't want to get all legalistic about it, but I'm saying this for your own good. So basically, it's better if you're single, if you're a Christian, because you can fully devote your lives to the Lord. This is it, because There's requirements for husbands. We're required to love our wives as Christ loved the church. And there's requirements for wives to love their husbands. So if you want to be a Christian and you're married, you got to divide your love and your service between your wives and your children and the Lord. Where if you're single, you can be fully devoted to the Lord. And so that's where this discipline, again, it's a discipline and it could change. Pope Francis talked about allowing married priests in South America because there's such a shortage of priests. So it's a discipline. It's not a dogma or doctrine. It can change. Okay. It hasn't always been this way, and it may not always be this way within the Latin Rite. So now to the objections of my evangelical brothers. They have some valid objections, and we'll address them. We'll respect them and address them. We'll start with, usually they throw this one out. Luke 4:38. I can't even read my own writing, but I think it's Luke 4:38. Yeah. After he left the synagogue, he entered the house of Simon, which is St. Peter, before Jesus changed his name. Simon's mother-in-law was afflicted with a severe fever, and they interceded with him about her. He stood up. So basically they say, well, Peter had a mother-in-law, so he must have been married. Yeah, Catholics know Peter was married. So it's a red herring, as they call it in politics. Or it just shows you they misunderstand. I just told you, you can be a married priest. Okay? So that's one thing they usually throw at us. Another one is 1 Timothy. We'll start with chapter 3, verse 2, and we'll go to 7, I guess. And Paul's instructing Timothy how to choose bishops and leaders of the church. Therefore, a bishop must be irreproachable, married only once. Some translations say married to one woman, but it really means the same thing. Therefore, a bishop must be irreproachable, married only once, temperament, self-control, decent, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not aggressive, but gentle, not contentious, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, keeping his children under control with perfect dignity. For if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how can he take care of the church of God? He should not be a recent convert, so that he may not become conceited and thus incur the devil's punishment. He must also have a good reputation among outsiders, so that he may fall into disgrace, the devil's trap. I would say, in all loving and respectfulness, most of my Protestant brothers and sisters don't follow any of that. These people go right out of high school, in the seminary, in the college, in the seminary, to become pastors. They're young, they don't have children, they're not married, so they're picking out one verse there, first of all. And it also says be married to one woman. Charles Stanley, a great Baptist preacher, he's on his second wife and he has no plans of stepping down. Paula White is on her third husband. She has no plans of stepping down. So you see this throughout all evangelicalism. Okay, so that's kind of off topic and I apologize. But what they're saying here is he should only have one wife. It's not saying he has to have one wife, but if he does have a wife, only one. In other words, if she dies, don't get remarried. And that's the rule of the Eastern Rite Church, like I explained it, or the Latin Rite if you're an Episcopalian or Lutheran married priest that converted. So, and that's the rule we have with our deacons. Our deacons can't be married if they become a deacon. We have permanent deacons that do 90% of what priests do. A lot of evangelicals don't realize that. Deacon's very important in the Catholic Church. He's right below the priest in his duties and obligations to the church, but he's allowed to be married when he becomes a deacon. But just like the priest of the Eastern Rite, once he becomes a deacon, if he's not married, he takes a vow of celibacy for the rest of his life. I mean, it's hardcore. It's totally devoted to the church and to God, that position. And if he is a married deacon and his wife dies, he can never remarry. So you really got to count the cost if you want to be a deacon in the church. And they don't get paid on top of all that. They don't get paid. They earned my respect, deacons in the Catholic Church, absolutely. So God bless our deacons. Pray for them, along with our priests. But then, oops, I dropped my note. apologize, I dropped my notes. So that's what they'll say. It says, therefore, a bishop must be married only once. Or in some translation said married to one woman. So, he should be married. Okay? Then if you go down to chapter 4, we'll go 1 through 5. Now the Spirit explicitly says that in the last times, some will turn away from the faith by paying attention to deceitful spirits and demonic instructions. Through the hypocrisy of liars with branded consciences, they forbid marriage and require abstinence from foods that God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. So they use that verse. 1 Timothy 4:3, they forbid marriage. Catholic Church does not forbid marriage. Catholic Church has made marriage a sacrament. That means it's very holy. A sacrament. A sacrament. Think about that. So it's voluntarily that priests take a vow of celibacy. They voluntarily take a vow of celibacy. We don't forbid anyone to be married. And they go through a long process. The church makes sure they know what they're getting into. You just can't, like in a Protestant church, you just can't take a course. Like I was in Assemblies of God and my pastor encouraged me to be a preacher. So he told me to get these courses. Back then it was before the internet. So you sent away for these courses and you did a course every month. And there was 24 courses. So in 2 years you'd be ordained Assemblies of God minister. Just like that, without ever going to seminary. Then you got the name it and claim it. If you're a good speaker and you can raise money, they don't care if you've even read the Bible. They'll put you up on stage and call you a reverend and ordain you a bishop before long. And that's no joke. I've been involved in these churches. I'm telling you the truth. Catholic Church takes years. It takes years. That's why there's such a shortage of priests. So the other argument that they'll throw out, and I had to say this, was sexual abuse. Well, if you don't let men get married, they're going to abuse children. That's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. Psychology Today, which is no way a Catholic publication. I think most of the editors in Psychology Today are atheists, if you ever read it. Okay? Psychology Today did an in-depth study of sexual abuse within the Catholic Church, and they said the percentage of priests is lower that abusing children is lower than the percentage of teachers abusing children. Is lower than the percentage of lawyers abusing children. Okay? It's just the media hates the Catholic Church and they're going to blast them, and because it's one big organization, it's easy. They're an easy target. Billy Graham's grandson, his name escapes me, but Google Billy Graham's grandson, who's an evangelical. He also happens to be a lawyer, and he investigates sexual abuse in Protestant evangelical churches. Recently, Billy Graham's grandson said, within evangelicalism, within Baptist church, Presbyterian churches, non-denominational Protestant churches, the rate of sexual abuse among children is 3 times that of the Catholic Church. That's a statistic. That's the truth. Look it up. It's for real. Of course, it's evil, whoever does it. I mean, it's evil and it needs to be stopped. But most of the cases in the Catholic Church were between the 70s and 80s. The Catholic Church recently has been doing a good job preventing this. I mean, one case is too many, obviously. But the percentage of priests that have done this in the past is less than 1. It's less than 1%. And the percentage of, really small children is really small. Most of it wasn't due to pedophilia, it was due to homosexuality, because they were with teenagers, okay? Which is evil, and it's evil. It's from the pit of hell. Satan infiltrated the church. There's no two ways about it in these men. But the Catholic Church is doing everything they can to stop it. I'm a catechist teacher, and I had to do it. I got to get a background check. I'm not allowed. I mean, there's protocol. I mean, they really did a lot since this scandal broke. And they paid a lot too. It really hurt the church. These few evil men really put a hurting on the church. Reputation and everything else. And more importantly, they hurt these children irreparable. And, I'd rather be Judas Iscariot than a priest that abused a child, because God loves the children. But anyway, that's going off course here a little bit. Now, the Catholic Church disagrees with Psychology Today on one premise. The Catholic Church's investigation showed the problem was homosexuality. So they banned, Pope Francis was the first pope to say homosexuals can't become priests. Used to be practicing homosexuals that can't become priests. You couldn't have been engaged in homosexual acts for years before you even enter seminary. And then they watched you and you had psychologists talk to you and made sure you could take this vow of celibacy, you know. Now Pope Francis said if someone even seems feminine, don't let them in seminary. Because in psychology today says no, their study says it wasn't, you know, you can't say homosexuals abuse children because there was 20% homosexual priests, but less than 1% of the priests abused children, so it was even less than 1% of the 20%. You see how the math works? So just because you're homosexual doesn't mean you're a pedophile. And I agree with that, but why even take the chance? If it was mostly homosexuals doing the abusing, why even take the chance? And that's what Pope Francis has said. We're not even going to take a chance. So there you have it. Celibacy within the church. And on one other short note, just popped in my head. I wasn't even in my notes. Like half the things I say when I start these, they're 5-minute videos and just things pop in my head and I take it a little longer. I hope you guys appreciate that and don't get annoyed. Like some people, like, would you just shut up and get to the point? But the thing that just popped in my head is Rich Mullins was an evangelical artist, wrote, "Our God is an awesome God." Great Christian artist. Before he died, he was going to RCIA, converting to Catholicism, and he took a vow of celibacy. He wasn't going to be a priest. He just thought it was he wanted to be wholly devoted to God. And if you watch the movie Ragamuffin, you'll see what kind of guy he was. And you'll see this guy, he wasn't perfect. He had a lot of flaws, and they show them all in the movie. But he was totally sold out to Jesus, and he wanted to be wholly belonging to Jesus. So he took a vow of celibacy. So celibacy isn't just for the priesthood. There's Christians, men and women, who have taken these vows. They don't go bragging about it, but they've done it. So it's a gift. It shouldn't be mocked. It should be admired, and it should be honored. Thank God for our celibate priests and our deacons. God bless.